My dear friend, before beginning the journey of exploring the teaching of non-self, one of the core and deepest doctrines of Buddhism, I would like to invite you to pause for a moment and ask yourself, who am I? The question seems simple, yet when contemplated deeply, it opens an endless labyrinth. We often point to this body and say, "This is me."
But what if one day we lost an arm? Would that body still be me? If our organs were transplanted into someone else, where would that me be? Would I still be myself? And if we go further, this body is a collection of billions of cells, trillions of molecules and atoms, constantly arising and passing away. So where does the unchanging I exist within this ceaseless flow of change? Today, we will step into a different stream, a perspective that shatters what we usually believe to be real. This is the journey of exploring the concept of non-self, that there is no fixed, permanent self. Though this concept may seem abstract and hard to grasp, I believe that if you listen with an open, non-judgmental mind, it may completely transform the way you see the world and yourself. Throughout life, humans carry a strong sense of self, of ego. From birth to adulthood, we are taught, this is you, this is your name, this is your body, these are your thoughts. The self is not only a label, but also a deeply rooted sense. I exist as a separate, independent, unchanging entity. We love this self, protect it, indulge it, and worship it. We suffer when it is hurt, feel joy when it is recognized, and fear when it is threatened. Most of our suffering, conflicts, and struggles in life stem from protecting this self. The Buddha called this attachment to self, clinging to an I that is not real. As long as there is attachment to self, there will be attachment to the love of self, cherishing and clinging to the ego. And from this comes countless suffering. We fear losing our honor, our beauty, our body, our position, the self we build day by day. Yet we do not realize that all of these have no fixed essence. So, what is non-self? Simply put, non-self does not mean denying the existence of human beings. It means denying the idea that there is a permanent, unchanging I, an independent entity controlling all our actions. According to Buddhism, a human being is a combination of the 5 aggregates: form, the physical body; feeling, sensations; perception, cognition; mental formations, psychological patterns; tendencies; and consciousness, awareness. These 5 elements come together to create what we call me. But each of them is impermanent, constantly arising, decaying, and transforming. If the components that make up the self are impermanent, then the so-called self is merely an illusion formed by the temporary union of the 5 aggregates. So what happens when we realize this? When we truly look deeply and see that every emotion, thought, and bodily process has no fixed controller, we begin to release our identification with the ego. We are no longer bound by anger, no longer proud of temporary achievements, no longer wounded by criticism. For we understand all these are phenomena, arising and passing away. You may ask, but if there is no self, then who is listening, understanding, and feeling right now? That very question marks the beginning of deep contemplation. The Buddha did not deny the phenomena of body and mind. He pointed out that there is no independent self behind them. There is only the stream of body, feelings, thoughts, and consciousness, all operating under the law of conditions. Like water flowing between rocks, each drop is part of the stream, yet no single drop controls the river. Our body-mind is the same. There is no soul behind it, no self directing everything. There is only the flow of causes and conditions, arising, changing, dissolving. The Buddha taught, when we see this clearly, we let go of self-attachment, and this is the doorway to true peace and freedom. When there is no self to defend, no image to preserve. Life becomes lighter and freer. Praise and blame, gain and loss, success and failure no longer disturb us, for we no longer cling to a false self. The realization of non-self does not come from reasoning, but from direct experience. By observing our own body and mind, each breath, each surge of anger, each thought that arises and fades away. When we truly witness this impermanence, the sense of self gradually fades. And from there, a profound freedom arises. My dear friend, this is only the beginning of the journey into non-self. In the next part, we will explore how the Buddha analyzed each of the 5 aggregates, each component of what we call self, to reveal that none of them is truly I or mine. This is the key to deeply understanding the teaching of non-self, and also the gateway to an entirely new way of living. From childhood, humans are nurtured with the sense of I am. It is a form of survival instinct, but gradually it becomes a rigid shell around us. We call this body me, this feeling me, this thought me, and we cling to each layer as if without them we do not exist. But if we look closely, this so-called self has no fixed foundation. When a person loses a part of their body, does the self remain intact? If someone's organs are replaced with another's, are they still the same self? These seemingly philosophical questions actually touch the very root of non-self, a central teaching of the Buddha. He did not present a concept for mere debate, but invited us to look deeply within. Does the thing we call self truly exist? In Buddhist teaching, a human being is composed of 5 elements called the 5 aggregates. Form, the physical body. Feeling, sensations. Perception, cognition. Mental formations, psychological habits. And consciousness, awareness. All of them are processes, none of them permanent. Yet we tend to identify ourselves with one or several of them. When we feel pain, we say, I am in pain. When we have repetitive thoughts, we say, this is who I am. We fail to see that it is precisely this clinging to the 5 aggregates that is the root of suffering. Like a train with carriages linked together, the existence of each person is also only the temporary operation of conditioned elements. Every emotion, every thought, every experience arises and passes away. Nothing lasts forever. So how could a permanent self exist within that? The Buddha taught, what is born will die. What is impermanent is suffering, and what is impermanent and suffering cannot be the self. Looking deeply into the 5 aggregates, we see that none of them can be called a fixed self. Form, this body, falls ill, ages, and dies. Feeling, sensations, shift constantly between joy and sorrow. Perception, recognition, is easily distorted by conditions. Mental formations, habits, and tendencies are shaped by past conditioning and environment. Consciousness, awareness, arises only through conditions. When seen clearly, the self we cling to is only an idea, a collection of unstable factors. We cannot command the body not to age, cannot order emotions to always be joyful, cannot force the mind to stay sharp forever. So, what are we? What truly is I? The teaching of non-self does not require us to deny our lived experience, but invites us to observe carefully and see that everything is flowing with independent origination. When we no longer cling to the notion of a permanent self, life becomes lighter amidst its changes. We no longer need to defend ourselves at all costs, no longer need to win every argument, no longer fear inevitable change. Practicing non-self is an inner transformation. It is not about forcing ourselves to forget the self, but about learning to see clearly its impermanent and empty nature. Instead of living to protect and indulge the ego, we live to understand, to release, and to merge with the stream of life. To visualize, imagine yourself as a cloud. The cloud does not claim I am me, nor does it have a fixed form. It continuously transforms, sometimes as rain, sometimes as snow, sometimes as fog, sometimes vanishing completely. Yet it never ceases to be. It only changes. Human existence is the same, a continuous flow of life without an independent entity that can be called self. With the insight of non-self, we can live more harmoniously with others. We no longer cling stubbornly to our opinions as absolute truth. We listen more deeply, empathize more fully, and no longer exhaust ourselves proving our worth. In modern life, where the ego is constantly fueled by social media, fame, and achievement, the practice of non-self is a profound act of liberation. My dear friend, if you have ever felt weary from trying to please everyone, if you have ever suffered from the belief that I am not enough, then take a moment to examine the self you are holding on to. You may discover that all this suffering comes from believing that the ego is real. But if you can let it go, not through denial, but through the wisdom of deep contemplation, you will begin to touch a profound freedom. No longer chasing self-image, no longer needing recognition, no longer needing to be right in everything. Then each breath becomes lighter, each step steadier, each word more peaceful. Non-self is not a doctrine to understand with the intellect, but a way of living, a path of returning to truth. And that truth can only be seen with a quiet mind, an open heart, and a life fully present in each moment. When a child is born and cries for the first time, people call it the beginning of a self. But does that self truly exist? Or is it merely a label for an ever-changing stream of biological, psychological, and social phenomena unfolding moment by moment? We often mistake the body for the self. When we lose part of the body, we still say, I am me. When memory fades and identity weakens, we still cling to I am myself. Yet upon deeper reflection, every cell, every thought, every breath that we call me is constantly changing, decaying, arising, and passing, like a river that never stops flowing. Within this stream, the self, if it exists at all, is only a temporary label, not an eternal essence. The Buddha did not deny body or mind. He simply pointed out that within them, no permanent entity can be found. Thus, non-self is not a negation of existence, but a way of seeing life with clarity and freedom. Seeing clearly that body is not self, feelings are not self, thoughts are not self, we can suddenly release much suffering born from identifying with what is impermanent. Imagine a person who believes they are the absolute master of their body. When illness strikes, they suffer terribly, thinking their very self is collapsing. But if they realize the body is only a compound of conditions, functioning under natural law, then instead of resisting, they care for it with compassion rather than fear. Similarly, when emotions surge, anger, sadness, or anxiety, we often say, I am angry, I am afraid. But in the light of non-self, these emotions are simply phenomena that come and go, not our essence. Recognizing this, we no longer drown in emotions but can watch them as clouds drifting across the sky of awareness. It is like a person standing on the riverbank, watching the current flow. They do not mistake the water for themselves, but one who is not mindful jumps into the river of emotions, is swept away, believing that is who they are. Non-self is precisely the capacity to remain on the bank, to observe without identifying. One of the hardest challenges in practice is to truly live with the insight of non-self. For the ego has penetrated all habits of thought, speech, and action. We say, I think, I want, I feel sad, as if there were a self standing behind everything, controlling and owning it all. Yet if we pause and observe carefully, we will see these are only chains of reactions arising from countless conditions. habits, memories, upbringing, culture, environment. We do not create thoughts by ourselves. We do not generate emotions out of nothing. They come as the result of countless interwoven causes. A passing word, the ringing of a bell, a distant memory. All can awaken states of mind we mistakenly believe to be ours. And if everything is the result of dependent origination, meaning nothing arises or exists on its own, then where is the self in all of this? This question is not meant to be answered, but to be contemplated. In meditation, we learn to look deeply into body, feelings, mind, and phenomena to see that everything operating within us is a conditioned event. When conditions are present, they manifest. When conditions dissolve, they vanish. There is no permanent entity that controls, possesses, or bears absolute responsibility. Understanding non-self, we cling less, crave less, hate less. Without me, there is no mine, belonging to me, because of me, or for me. And when those notions of ownership fade away, we live more lightly, more freely. In an old teaching, the Buddha told a story of a peacock trapped in a net. It had a chance to escape, but, fearing damage to its beautiful tail feathers, chose to stay, and was caught. A wolf, on the other hand, trapped by its leg, bit it off and ran free, knowing that life was more precious than a body part. This simple story carries a profound lesson. Sometimes, to live freely, we must dare to let go of what is not truly us, even our form, reputation, or dearest possessions. Non-self does not deny the role of the individual in life. On the contrary, it helps us live with greater responsibility. Free from ego bondage, we can act for the benefit of others without needing to glorify ourselves. When we no longer strive to prove who we are, we can truly listen to others with an open heart. In an age where everyone struggles to be somebody, the Buddha's teaching of non-self becomes especially important. It reminds us to return to simplicity and authenticity. It shows us we need not be better than others to feel valuable. We only need to live mindfully, in each breath, in each step, and that is already wholeness. My dear friend, non-self is not a lofty philosophy reserved for monks or scholars. It is a reality present in every moment of daily life. When you are angry, and know you're angry. When you are in pain, yet do not weave a story of suffering around it. When you can let something go without feeling a loss. That is already living in the spirit of non-self. And from that insight of non-self, your heart will naturally open. Compassion will grow. For you are no longer confined within a small self and the suffering it creates. See you again in the next part, where we continue exploring the depth, wonder, and liberation the teaching of non-self offers. If today's sharing has brought you a new perspective or peace of mind, please give the video a like to spread the message of mindfulness. Don't forget to subscribe to Buddha in Mind and turn on notifications, so you won't miss the next content, a place you can always return to, listen, and understand yourself more deeply each day. Thank you for accompanying me. When mentioning non-self, many feel unclear. Some even feel afraid, thinking Buddhism denies the self to the point of denying existence. But that is not true. The teaching of non-self is not meant to erase human value, but to be the key that opens the door of inner liberation, freeing us from the bondage of the false ego. The Buddha does not ask us to deny our feelings, our joys, or our sorrows. He simply advises us not to identify ourselves with them. When we say, "I am angry," in truth what we experience is just a wave of anger energy arising in the mind. If we cling to it and declare, "I am an angry person," then the ego forms and suffering follows. But if we observe that anger with mindfulness, we will see it come and go, and we will not be carried away. Similarly, when happiness arises, if we cling to it thinking, "This is me," then when joy fades, we feel lost and suffer, because we have mistaken an impermanent state for a self. Non-self does not mean indifference, but clear recognition that everything is only a phenomenon, arising and passing, not an eternal identity. Misunderstanding. Non-self can lead to two extremes. One is clinging to self as a permanent entity. The other is denying existence entirely, leading to escapism or loss of direction. Neither is the right view in Buddhism. Non-self is not denial of life, but understanding its true nature so we can live more freely and compassionately. Another important point, the Buddha never asked us to believe in non-self as a dogma. He taught us to contemplate and experience it directly. In practicing mindfulness, observing breath, observing feelings, we gradually see the constant change of body and mind. Then we are no longer deceived by the illusion of a permanent self. Reflect on your own life. From birth until now, how many times have you changed? Your appearance, thoughts, emotions, preferences, all shifting ceaselessly. The self at age 5 is not the self today. So what is I? We can say that what we call self is really a continuous flow of body, mind, feelings, and consciousness, with no fixed point to grasp as ego. That is why Buddhism regards the ego as an illusion, a construct born of ignorance. Understanding this, we become lighter, less attached, more forgiving. Why? Because without clinging to self, we are no longer hurt by harsh words, no longer compelled to defend our opinions, no longer feel the need to win or prove ourselves. The mind grows open, soft and compassionate toward ourselves and others. But non-self does not make us indifferent or dull. On the contrary, one who understands non-self lives more fully, more genuinely, for they are no longer bound by an image they must maintain. They live true to themselves without needing to prove, compare, hide, or display. The teaching of non-self also helps us release the fear of death. Death is simply the end of one conditioned process, like a wave dissolving back into the ocean. The wave does not vanish. It returns to the vast sea from which it came. Understanding non-self, we live with greater freedom and courage, no longer enslaved by the fear of ending. In practice, you can begin with simple things. When criticized, instead of reacting with anger, pause for a moment and observe the feelings in body and mind. Ask yourself, where does this emotion come from? Am I truly being attacked, or is this just a habit of reaction rising up? Observing this way, you will see that anger is not you, but only a passing phenomenon occurring within you. In the same way, when you feel pride or self-satisfaction, ask yourself, what is this feeling? Will it come and go? Does it truly represent who I am? Such questions help us recognize more clearly the impermanent, non-self nature of mental states. There is a beautiful image to illustrate the spirit of non-self. A bamboo stands firm in the storm not because it is rigid, but because it bends with the wind. A person who lives with the insight of non-self is the same. They do not break under life's storms, for they do not cling to a rigid self. Practicing non-self is not an easy path, for it requires courage to let go, to look honestly at oneself, to stop blaming and judging. Yet with perseverance, you will find yourself lighter, more peaceful, and deeper in each life experience. In the next part, we will reflect more deeply on the connection between non-self and love. How true compassion blossoms when we are no longer bound by a small self and selfish desires. There is a meaningful paradox in Buddhism. The more we let go of the self, the closer we come to true love. When the self is strong, our love often carries conditions. We only love those like us, who follow our wishes, who treat us well. But when the self subsides, we see that everyone deserves love, for everyone suffers, wanders in ignorance, and longs for happiness. The teaching of non-self does not make us indifferent. On the contrary, it opens our hearts to the world with profound understanding. When we see ourselves as merely a flow of body and mind, birth and death, we also realize others are the same. No one is an eternal enemy. No one is a sinner beyond redemption. Everyone hurts, fears, and seeks peace. This insight is gentle yet powerful. It does not require effort to forgive or to love. Compassion blooms naturally. In daily life, how often do we get angry at others simply because they do not meet our expectations? A friend who seems inattentive, a colleague who disregards our opinions, a relative indifferent to our feelings. If we cling to ego, to the sense of I am offended, I am not respected, I am right, then anger and blame endlessly arise. But if we look with the eyes of non-self, we see those emotions as clouds drifting through the mind. And the other person, too, may be drifting in their own clouds, full of wounds, misunderstandings, and pressures. We do not need to defend or condemn. We only need to understand. And that very understanding is compassion. Non-self is not merely a philosophical theory, but a concrete, daily practice. Each time anger arises, instead of saying, I am angry, return to the breath and look deeply into that emotion. Ask, who is angry? Is there truly a self being hurt? Or is it just a reactive habit accumulated over many years? This question is not to deny emotion, but to separate ourselves from blind identification with it. When we are no longer identified with anger, we are free. And with freedom, we can choose to love instead of hate, to understand instead of blame. In the Buddha's teachings, there is a point worth noting. He did not only teach non-self as a perspective, but emphasized practicing non-self through compassionate living. The Buddha said that if a practitioner lacks compassion, their knowledge is only dry theory. And one with compassion, but no wisdom, may fall into attachment. Only when compassion and wisdom go together does the path of liberation fully open. Where there is no self, compassion naturally appears. One who deeply understands non-self does not see themselves as superior, does not need to prove anything. They need not win arguments or dominate disputes. They can step back, yield, smile amid criticism, for they no longer feel their self threatened. Their mind is like a still lake, unmoved by the winds outside. You may have met such a person, someone whose presence brings you unexplainable peace. They do not preach, boast of knowledge, or try to change others. They simply are, fully present, listening, gentle. Their non-self allows you to feel your own presence more clearly. They do not occupy space, so you feel spacious. They do not judge, so you feel free to be yourself. The wonder is, you too can become such a person. Not by striving to be special, but by gradually letting go of false notions of self. As we cling less to ourselves, we begin to see others more clearly and deeply. We no longer judge them by their past or by outward behavior, but by what lies beneath: their pain, their yearning for love, their fragile humanity. Non-self also heals us. When we no longer cling to a fixed self-image, I must be strong, I must be perfect, I must not be weak, we can embrace ourselves even in our most vulnerable moments. We no longer blame ourselves for mistakes, nor feel ashamed of failures. We understand that all these are just passing experiences, not an eternal self. Thus we become more forgiving, steadier. Many believe one must renounce the world, retreat into forests or meditation halls to practice non-self. But truly, non-self can be lived in the simplest of things: washing dishes, sweeping floors, talking with a child, debating with a colleague. Any moment we remember, this is not me, not mine, not myself. That moment is a step on the path of non-self. The practice of non-self does not demand that we become someone else. It helps us return to our true selves, no longer masked by roles, identities, and old patterns. Each time we let go of an idea about ourselves, it is like shedding a tight garment so we can live more spaciously, lightly, and naturally. And in that letting go, love is born, not pity, not condescending charity, but deep empathy between fellow beings, all learning how to live amidst impermanence and non-self. In the final part, we will go deeper into practice. How to bring non-self into daily life in a practical, mindful way. When we speak of non-self, many may think of it as an abstract concept, reserved for monks or hermits in the mountains. But in truth, non-self is never apart from life. In fact, it only carries true meaning when expressed through every action, thought, and response in the smallest details of our daily living. Imagine an ordinary day. You wake up with a plan in mind, then suddenly it is disrupted by something unexpected. Your child spills water, your motorbike has a flat tire, a colleague sends a message that annoys you. If your ego is still clinging tightly, your mind will erupt at once. Why me? I don't deserve this. My whole day is ruined. But if you are mindful, you pause for a moment, breathe deeply, and realize, this emotion is not me. It is just arising and will soon pass. There is no need to react out of habit anymore. You have the freedom to choose a gentler response. That is what the practice of non-self looks like. It is not denying emotions, but not letting yourself be controlled by them. Instead of identifying with, I am hot-tempered or I am offended, you return to the truth. This is simply a feeling arising in body and mind, not a permanent self. And with that insight, an inner space of freedom opens up. A gentle silence flows in. In modern life, when everything moves too fast, when people react hastily on social media, when the ego is inflated by likes and followers, practicing non-self becomes even more essential. It helps us not be swept away by external noise, not be distracted from our true values. We no longer need to affirm ourselves through praise and blame. We no longer need to race to maintain an image. We only need to live honestly, mindfully, and humbly, knowing that everything is changing, including ourselves. The journey of practicing non-self is not about trying to erase oneself, but about letting go of mistaken views about the self. It is seeing clearly that what we call I is just a continuous flow of body and mind, conditioned by karma, environment, circumstances, and causes. There is nothing truly fixed that we must defend at all costs. And when this is seen clearly, a sense of ease arises. We no longer struggle to be somebody. We can simply be ourselves, simple, genuine, and present in each moment. One practical way to cultivate non-self in daily life is to practice mindfulness of body and mind. When walking, walk with awareness, feeling each step touching the ground, recognizing that even your legs are changing each day. When eating, eat mindfully, seeing food as the crystallization of earth and sky, of countless conditions, and realizing that this body is just a small part of that vast web. When speaking, speak not from the need to assert yourself or to win, but from inner stillness. Non-self is not avoidance of responsibility. On the contrary, one who understands non-self lives even more responsibly, not out of fear, but out of understanding. Knowing that each action is a link in the great chain of dependent origination, they choose to live kindly, peacefully, compassionately. They are no longer selfish, thinking only of themselves, but see themselves in others and others in themselves. Most importantly, non-self opens a new path to healing. For if we no longer cling to the idea of a wounded self, our pains grow lighter. When we are no longer trapped in the image of I am a victim, I am the betrayed one, we can release the past and move forward more freely. We do not forget, but we are no longer bound by memory. We learn to accept and then to transform. In the light of non-self, we no longer need to argue to be right, nor always defend personal opinions. For we know that every opinion arises and passes, shaped by experience, culture, and psychology. None is absolute. Instead of judging, we listen. Instead of reacting, we observe. And in that space, understanding is born. Compassion blossoms. When you see someone driving carelessly, instead of getting angry, remember they too are driven by their stream of consciousness, perhaps burdened by worries and pressures. When you hear someone criticize you, instead of resisting, breathe deeply and recall, those words are not me. I do not need to be swept away by what comes from outside. Non-self does not make you weak, it makes you free. And when you truly live in the spirit of non-self, life becomes more fluid. You are no longer confined to a definition, a role, or an expectation. You can be serious yet humorous, strong yet gentle, engaged yet letting go, because you are no longer bound by ego. You live like water, clear, quiet, yet full of vitality. People often ask, who am I in this life? But that question can be transformed into, what am I when I no longer cling to the self? And you will be surprised at what unfolds. An immense spaciousness, a profound awakening, a love without conditions. That is where non-self leads us. Thank you for accompanying Buddha in mind in exploring the teaching of non-self, one of the most profound and beautiful core doctrines of Buddhism. If you find these reflections helpful, please like the video to spread the value of mindfulness to more people and subscribe to the channel to continue walking together on the path of returning to our true selves. See you again in the next videos, where we will slow down together, look more deeply, and walk peacefully amid life's flowing stream.